Okay, welcome everybody. We will be going live any second now. Just waiting for YouTube to catch up, and then we're ready to go. Okay, hello and welcome to this session on using Power Query on the Mac. My name is Mike Thomas. I'm the founder of the exceltrainer.co.uk and the owner of this YouTube channel. Just a couple of things before we start. First of all, this is a live session. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Please feel free to come on and say hello in the chat. But for anyone who's watching later on YouTube, it's a live session. Things may go wrong. It might not be as polished as a pre-recorded video. I might go off-piste when answering questions, but that all adds to the fun, doesn't it? The other thing to mention is this is beta software. Things may not work as expected. Things may be broken, which hopefully Microsoft will fix. So, what is Power Query used for? Well, there are two things that Power Query is used for. One is importing data from other sources, and the other is cleaning up and transforming data. So once the data is in Excel, it'll probably need cleaning up. And by cleaning up, I mean things like deleting the dashed line from row 2 and changing the date format and removing the dollar symbols from the revenue and realigning data with the headings, that kind of thing. Power Query is also used to perform data transformations, which means converting data from one structure to another. Here's an example of data transformation. The table on the left was imported into Excel from a web page. But in order to be able to sort and filter and be used as a lookup table, it needs to be converted or transformed into a simple list. And Power Query can do that with just 2 clicks. Here's another common example of data transformation. 3 CSV files. Doesn't have to be CSV files, could be Excel files, one for each region. They need to be converted, combined into a single file. And this merging needs to happen every month. Well, Power Query can do that as well. Although having said that, at the present time, Power Query on the Mac can't do that. Power Query started life in 2010 as a downloadable add-in. It could only be used with Excel 2010 and then 2013 on Windows. And once you've installed it, a Power Query menu appears on the ribbon. When we got to Excel 2016 and then later, including 365, you actually don't need Power Query at all. The functionality that Power Query provided is built into Excel. It's all in the Get and Transform section of the Data tab on the ribbon. So even though Power Query hasn't actually been part of Excel for several years, people still use that term. In terms of Power Query on the Mac, in late 2019, Microsoft gave us the ability to refresh queries in Excel files that are being created in Windows, Excel for Windows, and provided support to use VBA to create and edit queries. Earlier this year, they added the ability to import data into Excel from CSV files and other Excel files. And now we have the ability to clean and transform data using the query editor. Up until now, the only way to run Excel on a Mac and be able to use Power Query is to use the Windows version and have it running inside a virtual machine, which is exactly how I've been doing it. I have a Parallels virtual machine running Windows and it runs 24/7 on my Mac. And with that, let's go and take a look at Power Query. And I'm going to start with importing data. So, I'll go and open one of my files. Bear with me, and there we go. The file I'm going to open is Power Query 1. And close that blank one down. Okay, so What I have here is the beginnings of an HR dashboard, and this dashboard will include charts and pivot tables, but before I can create them I need to import the data, and the data to be imported is in a CSV file which has come from our HR system. If I go to the data menu on the ribbon, we now have a Get Data Power Query option. So I'm going to choose that and click on Get Data. And what this will do there we go, is it will give us a choice of opening or importing data from a text file or CSV file, or importing data from an Excel workbook. So at the moment, Power Query on the Mac only supports those two options. It doesn't have as many options as Power Query on Windows, but I'm sure Microsoft will get there. So I'm going to choose text or CSV. I'm then going to click Browse and navigate to my folder with my files in. There we go, and choose employees.csv and click Get Data. Then click Next and click Load. And what Load will do is that will load the data into the spreadsheet. It creates a new sheet, and it's called the sheet Employees because that's the name of the CSV file, and it's brought all the data in. So the data is now in there. I'm going to rename the data, the sheet. I'm going to call it Raw Data, and it's automatically put that data into a table. So we have a nice proper formatted Excel table here. So I go to the table menu, and you can see the table is called Employees. If I want to change the formatting of that table, I can do that. Whenever you import data using the Get Data command, behind the scenes, Excel creates a query. And a query is simply the connection information that is needed to bring that data in and to connect to the original data source. So let's go and do another import. So if we go to Data, Get Data, and this time choose Excel Workbook. Go to Browse, and I'm going to bring in the file called Exchange Rates. I would do if I can find my mouse pointer, which seems to have disappeared. Let's try that again. Bear with me a second. Let's try coming out of this. There we go. All right, let's try it again. So Browse, Exchange Rates, and Get Data, and then click Next. Now what we've got here is we've got one sheet, so I'm going to click on that sheet there, and I'm going to bring that data in. So actually that's not the file I'm going to use. I'm going to bring in a different file. So let's go back to Get Data, and Browse, and choose the file called Live Currency Rates. I'm having a real problem with my mouse pointer here. There we go, no idea what the problem is there. Live Currency Rates. Okay, so click Next. That's what I was after. Okay, this particular file has got two sheets in it, and each sheet's got a table. So those are the sheet names, and those are the table names. So if I select both sheets and then click Load, what it's going to do is it's going to load the data in from both sheets. So it's created two new sheets, and each sheet has got the data in. Okay, so that is how to bring the data in. Let's save that file. Okay, so you can bring data in from Excel files, you can bring data in from CSV files at the moment. That may change, as I say. So having brought the data in, The next thing we'll look at is refreshing data. One of the big benefits of using Power Query is that if the original data changes, you just have to hit refresh and the imported data gets updated. So let me show you that one. Okay, so refresh. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and open up the CSV file. This is the raw CSV file. And just make a couple of changes. What I'll do is I'll just copy and paste and add a couple of extra rows of data. Save that, close it down. Then go back into the Excel file and go to the Data tab, and there is a refresh all button there. There's a couple of ways you can do this actually. You can right click on a table and click refresh, but that will only refresh that particular table. Instead of doing that, if I want to refresh all the data, as it happens, I do only want to refresh this data, but sometimes you just want to do a total refresh of everything. So go to the data menu and click refresh all. And now if I whiz down to the bottom of this table, there is the extra rows of data. So that's how to import data and how to refresh data. Next thing we'll look at is cleaning data. And this is where the query editor comes in. So let's go and have a look at the query editor. This is the power of Power Query, as they say. So I'm going to use the same file. I'm going to stick with this file, Power Query 1, and go over to the live currency rates table. The data that you've got there is exactly how it was brought in from that Excel file. So I'm going to select column C and delete it because I don't need that data in there. So let's delete column C. And I also want to change those slashes to dashes, and the reason that I want to do that is because that's what the boss has asked for. Can we have dashes instead of slashes? So just do a standard find and replace to change those. Change the slash to a dash and replace all. Oops, that was an equal sign. Let's do that again. Undo that and try that again. So replace the slash with a dash and replace all. Now, so far so good, but watch what happens when I do a refresh. Everything goes back to how it was. So if you're refreshing data 100 times a day or even twice a day, you know, the last thing you want is to be able to is to have to manually go and make those changes again. On a bigger scale, it could be that I want to change all the United Kingdoms to UK. It could be that I want to have the department in uppercase. It could be that I want to apply a filter to only show the people who are still in the company. So anyone who's got a leaving date is not displayed. And then this data is not going to change several times a day. This data maybe will change once a day or once a week. You know, if you employ a lot of contractors, then you're going to have a high turnover of staff. But the same holds true. Every time you hit the refresh, it's going to bring the data back because it's pulling the data in directly from the CSV file or the Excel file or wherever it came from. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the query editor to add extra actions or steps, as they're known, to the refresh process. To do that, I need to go to Data, click the arrow next to Get Data, and launch the Power Query editor. So this is the brand new feature that Microsoft have added. What I should have said earlier is that it's only available to the people who are signed up to the beta. So if you're on the beta channel of Microsoft 365, then you should have access to that option there. Okay, so data, click the arrow against get data and launch Power Query Editor. And it doesn't actually matter which tab I was on in the spreadsheet. What it's listing is it's listing on the left hand side the 3 queries. As I said before, queries are created automatically when you import data. So there's the employees query, there's the one of the queries from the exchange rates file, and there's the other query from the exchange rates file, because I was bringing 2 sets of data in, so it's created 2 queries. So let's make sure that we're on the live currency rates query. So when you select a query, you get a data preview, so you can see what the data looks like. You get the name of the query. If you want to change the query name, you can do it from here. And you get the query steps or actions. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of actions to that list of apply steps. It's very much like a macro. It's automation. So those 4 actions, those 4 steps, I didn't create them. They're created automatically. So the first step, each step's given a name. The first step, which is called source, that relates to where the data's coming from. And if I click on that step, it actually shows me the raw data. So this is what the data looks like as far as Excel's concerned when it looks at that web page. Sorry, not that web page, that Excel file. Then the navigation step, that is where it's specifically gone to a specific sheet within that Excel file. You'll notice that the column headings are column 1, column 2, column 3. And that's because at the point that it brings the data in, it doesn't recognize currency rate and change as column headings. It thinks they are a row of data. But it very quickly realizes that they're not a row of data, they're actually headings. So it promotes the first row to be headings. And the name given to that step or that action is promoted headers. You can see that every time I click on a step, what it's doing is it is showing you a preview of the data. So now we have currency, rate, and change. And then the 4th step is changed column type. So at the moment, the column types are shown as ABC123, which basically means not quite sure what sort of data is in that column. So it's pretty much treating it as text. Then it does a quick analysis of all the data and very quickly realizes actually the rate column contains numbers. So it changes the data type for the rate column to be numeric. It also changes the data type for the first column to be text, that's what the ABC is, and for the third column to be text. So it's changed the data type of all 3 columns. That's actually something that the Windows version wouldn't do. The Windows version, it would change the data types, but it's using the same file on Windows, it would leave the first and third as ABC123, or it would bring them all in as text. So there are slight differences between the Windows and Mac, but not great differences. Okay, so those are the 4 steps that it's automatically added. You can rename any of those steps. So you could do that by right-clicking on one of those steps and selecting rename. So instead of calling it changed column type, I could call it change data type of all columns. I could change the name of the source. I could change the name of any of those. I'm not going to spend time doing that. I think you should get the idea that I've just renamed each step just to make it more sensible and more logical. So how do we add a step? Well, what you do is you put your cursor where you want the step to go. It always put the new step immediately below whichever step you're on here. So I would want to select the last step because I want the next step to be after change data type. And then I have to think, what do I want to do? And what I want to do here, what I want to happen, is I want it to delete the column called change. So I can click on that column to select it in the data preview, and I can either click on Home, Remove Columns, or I can right click on the heading and select Remove Columns. Either way, what it does is it adds a step, it adds an action, and it updates the data preview. And I would probably rename that step to something like delete change column, just so that I know what that step is actually doing. And then the other thing I wanted to do was change the slash to a dash. So I select that column and I can either right click and select replace values, or I can use the option on the menu, which is on the transform tab, transform replace values. The value to find is the slash, the value to replace with is the dash, and click on OK. So now we have another step, and I'll rename that one, and I will call this one change slash to dash in currency. And then I will close down the query editor by going to the Home tab and clicking Close and Load. And what that will do is that will save the changes. So let's go to the currency rates sheet, and it has actually updated the changes right now already. But if I do a refresh, you can see it's not bringing the third column back with the little arrows, and it's also not bringing the slashes back, because what happens when you hit refresh is it's like running a macro. It's like telling Excel to run all of the queries behind the scenes. That's what's happening. So it's going to the query called live currency rates, and it's performing those 6 actions. It's going out to that Excel file, grabbing the data, bringing it into here, changing the data types, changing the headings, deleting the third column, and doing the find and replace. Okay, so do we have any questions at this point? I don't see any. All right, great. Don't forget, if you want to ask questions, feel free to just put them in the chat. I've got my eye on the chat. All right, so the next thing that we will look at, let's go back into the query editor. So click the arrow next to the Get Data button and go to Launch Power Query Editor. And make sure we're on the right query. So that's the query there that we've been working on. So I've shown you how to rename a step. There is no option to actually insert a step. You perform an action and it inserts the step for you. But what if you want to delete a step? So what if you decided, well, actually, we don't want to delete that third column, or we don't want to change the slash to a dash? Then what you do is you click the little X there, just to the left of the step name, and that will remove that step. Now, there's no undo, so you'd either have to close the query editor down without saving the changes, or you'd have to go and add that step again manually. So let's go and add that step again manually. So this time I'll do a right click on the currency column and replace values, find the slash and replace with a dash. And what if you wanted to edit the configuration of a step? Well, you click on the little cogwheel, which you'll find not every step has a cogwheel, but if there is a cogwheel, you can click on it, and that opens up the settings for that particular step, and you can make the changes. So if the boss said, well, actually, I'd rather have a colon than a dash, you can just go in here and edit it. And that updates the query. So that means now when you're back in Excel and every time you hit refresh, what it will do is it will go through those 6 actions, and the last action is to replace the slash, which is part of the other Excel file, the original data. It will replace that with a colon. The other way that you can make changes to the step details is to edit it directly up here. So Power Query uses a language called M, and every time you select a step, it shows you in this panel up here, it shows you the M code associated with that step. So if the file changed its name or its location, when you hit refresh back in Excel, you're going to get an error message because it can't find the file. So you can either come into here, click the cogwheel, and then go and browse and choose the correct file, or you can edit directly up here. So as I go through these steps, if you look at the code up there, that is the M code, which is written for you. That's the great thing. You don't have to learn how to use M unless you want to. It's all hidden behind the scenes via a nice GUI interface, but it is there if you want to edit it directly. So as I click on these steps, what it's doing is it's showing you the code. So if I decided, right, well actually I do want to replace the slashes with dashes, I can either click the cogwheel and edit it there, or just go and edit it directly in the M code. So let's close and load that. Did that do anything? There we go, that's better, yeah. And it's updated my data. All right, so I'm going to edit the query again. Oops, edit the query. Go into the query editor, and what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to split that column into 2. So it's now been decided that the data in the spreadsheet is going to be made up of 2 columns, so like currency from and currency to, instead of 1 column just with a separator. So what I'll do is I will delete the replaced value step. No point having that step. There's no point actually just changing the slash to a dash and then splitting the column in 2. You might as well not have that step. The fewer steps you have, the faster your refresh will happen. So get rid of unnecessary steps. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click onto the column with the currencies in, and right click split column by delimiter. A delimiter is 1 or more characters. If you've used text to columns, then you'll be familiar with splitting a column by delimiter. The disadvantage of text to columns is that you can only split it by a single character. With this, you can split it by a string if you want to. So it's not a comma that I want to use. I'm going to choose custom, and I'm going to put space / space, because if you look closely, there is actually a slash, a space before the slash and after the slash. So I want to break this. I want to break that column up using space / space as the separator, and click on OK. So now we have 2 columns. To rename the columns, because they're now named currency.1 and currency.2, I just double click. You can right click and select rename. Where's it gone? It's not here. On the Windows version, there is an option on the right click to rename the column headings. Unless it's hidden somewhere else. No, it's not. So I'd have to use the menu for that. So it's easier just to double click on the column heading and just edit it there. So currency from and currency to. You'll notice if you look at the applied steps box that it's only created one step. Sometimes Power Query will do that. If it sees two actions that are the same, performed one after each other, it combines them together into a single step. The problem you've got now is if you deleted that step, then you would be reversing both column heading changes. So it would go back to currency.1 and currency.2. So that's where editing the code up here can come in handy, because if you just wanted to change currency 2 to be target currency, then you could edit it up there, because there isn't, for some reason best known to Microsoft, there isn't a way of having a cogwheel there. There is no cogwheel, so you can't edit that step directly. Okay, now let's leave that query there. I don't need to close the query editor down, although actually I will. If I close and load, at least it'll load the data into the spreadsheet and it'll let me save the file, and then go back into the query editor. And I now want to do some tidying up, data cleaning, data manipulation on the employees table. So if we just go and have a look at the actual data, this is our employee data. And I need to tidy this data up. The way the data's come in from our CSV file is not in the right format in terms of how I need it. So I will go to Data, Launch Power Query Editor, and make sure that I'm on the employees query. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the TET dash from the employee number column. TET dash is the Excel trainer. So I didn't realize that I've got nearly 1,000 employees, but there you go. Now there's a couple of ways I can do this. One way would be to split the column by delimiter, end up with two columns. So split by where the dash is, end up with two columns, and then delete the column with TET in it. That's one option, but that would then be two steps. So split will be one step, delete the column would be the other step. The other way to do it would be to make sure you're on the employee number column and click on transform and extract. Extract basically means keep. So I want to extract, or I want to keep the 5 rightmost characters, although we don't know that it's always going to be 5 characters. If it was, then I could actually use last characters and specify 5. So that's one way to do it. But when I get over 99,999 employees, then it's not going to be 5 characters. So the other way I can do it is to extract text after delimiter. Extract, as I said, means keep. So we want to keep the text after the delimiter, which in this case is going to be the dash. So let's do that and click on OK. So it's kept everything after the dash. Doesn't matter how many characters there were after the dash. And it's added a step. It's added a step, extracted text after delimiter. As I said, in the real world, I would probably change the name of that just to make it more realistic. But from a time point of view, I'm not going to change the names of all of those steps. Okay, the next thing I want to do is anybody who has left the company has got a value in the leaving date column, but I don't want to see the people who've left the company. I'm only interested in the people who are still at the company. So I'm going to apply a filter. And that filter is going to be keep everything that is null. Because if you haven't got a leave date, you've not left the company. Okay, so click the drop down arrow and take the tick out of select all and put the tick into null. So what I'm saying is I only want to see, I want to filter out anything that is not null. Click OK. And what I now have is I have less records than I did have. I've got just the ones that have null in there. So if I now come out of this, close and load, anything that had a leave date is no longer displayed. It's not actually deleting the data. All it's doing is filtering out what ends up in the spreadsheet. So if I go back into the query editor, if I was to click on the step before the filtered rows, we can actually see that the people with a leaving date are still there. If I was to delete the filtered row step, then the people with a leaving date would still be displayed. So it's not really deleting the data. That's the great thing. What it's doing is it's loading the data from the original data source into Excel, but it's passing that data through a series of actions. And whatever the data looks like on the last step is what will be passed through to the spreadsheet. So, for example, I want the surnames to be displayed in uppercase. No, I won't do the surnames, I'll do the departments. I want the departments to be displayed in uppercase. Now I know I can do that in Excel. In fact, I can do a lot of this in Excel rather than through the query editor. But the problem with doing it in Excel is the problem I showed you earlier, that when you hit refresh, it loses all those changes. Whereas when you hit refresh, because it's going through all of these actions, then it's keeping all of those changes. It's not actually keeping the changes, technically it's going through those changes, so it's performing a series of actions on the data, and what you end up with is what the data looks like in Excel. So click onto the department heading to select it and go to transform and then format and uppercase. As simple as that. So it's uppercased the text. It's created another step. So every time I perform an action, it is creating a step. Okay. Another thing I want to do now is, because our employees, because our company has decided to implement a new HR system, and this HR system needs to have a certain number of characters as the employee number, I need to pad those numbers with 4 zeros at the beginning. So instead of 7454 and 7455, it's going to say 000 0745544 and so on. Again, I could do that manually in Excel. I could do a concatenation to add 4 zeros to the beginning of each entry, but guess what? When you hit refresh all, you will lose those because it will just bring the data in from the original file. So I'm going to select the employee number column, go to the transform menu, click on format and add prefix. A prefix is one or more characters that appears at the beginning of the entry. So let's put in 4 digits and click OK. And now you can see it's stuck 4 digits there. So it's going to take, basically what it's going to do is it's going to take the original employee number, which is in the original Excel spreadsheet or CSV file. It's going to bring that in. Somewhere along the line, it's going to knock off the TET dash, and then it's going to replace that with 4 zeros. Now, if I wanted the adding of the 4 zeros to be immediately after it's removed the TT dash, I could drag the added prefix and stick it straight after extracted text after delimiter. So now it's there immediately after. Just be careful when you do move steps around, because you could break something. You could have a step that relies on another step further down. So if you move a step, let's say I moved this step up here, the whole thing now is broken, because this step here refers to things that haven't yet been done. So it's telling me that the employee number column wasn't found. So this step actually adds 4 zeros to the beginning of each entry in the employee number column. But at this point, the employee number column hasn't been generated. So let's move that back to there, and everything is okay again. Another thing I want to do is I want to know what day of the week each person started with the company. So why I want to know that? Does it matter? It could be that I want to produce a pivot table that says 100 employees started on a Monday and 50 employees started on a Tuesday. Maybe the head of HR wants to generate some statistics and needs that information. Or maybe we did it on the date of birth. So we want to know how many people in the company were born on a Monday, how many were born on a Tuesday, and so on and so forth. So to do that, I'm going to select, I'll do the hire date. Select the hire date and then click on transform and date and time column over on the right, and date and day and name of day. So what that has now done is it's now converted the start date to only show the date, the day name of that date. Now, that's not what I wanted. What I actually wanted was to create another column. So I wanted to keep the original as it was and create another column. So I will delete that step, and instead of using transform date and time date, I'll click on add column date. So see the difference. Apart from that is date and time column, and that is date. Transform will make changes to the original, whereas add column will add a new column. Okay, so I've just seen Peter's question. I will answer that in a second. Let me just do this one first. So add column, date, day, and name of day. So we now have a new column. It's called it day name. I can easily rename that. So that was day of hire, or day name of hire, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so Peter says if there are more numbers in the original employee number, that will just add 4 zeros. Is there a way of accounting for that so they are all the same length? There is. I think you'd have to write some M code for that, which would involve using the command, I think, text.pad, if memory serves me right. I can check that for you, but I think that's the way you'd have to do it, because I did it once and off the top of my head I can't remember the exact syntax, but yeah, it can be done. Okay, so we have created an extra column that shows the name of the day, and if I wanted to then move that column so that it was right next to the hire date, I can just drag and drop it, and there we go. Is it there? Yep, there it is. It's right next to the hire date, and we've got another step, reordered columns. All right, so I'm going to close and load. that brings in the data. I don't know why that's showing as dates. That shouldn't be showing as dates. I will deal with that in a second. But yeah, that's worked, and that's worked, and that's worked. So last appraisal rating, that should not be a date format. That should be a number format. So let's go back into the query editor and go to last appraisal rating. Well, it's showing us a numeric value. It's showing us a whole number. I can only assume that it's something to do with the formatting of column L. So if I go and change the formatting of column L to a number with no decimal places, that resolves the problem. Okay, and we will save that. Okay, carrying on with the data cleaning. I'm going to close this file down, and I'm going to open up the file called Meeting Invitees. So what I have here is a list of people who have been invited to a meeting, and the list has been copied and pasted from the To field in Outlook. So it's actually all in one cell. It's not in separate columns, it's not in separate rows, it's all in one cell. Okay, so what I had to do is I had to manually add a heading in there. The heading Meeting Invitees could be anything. It could be ABC, it could be a heading, but I chose to just try and make it logical, so Meeting Invitees. So originally that data was on row 1, I just inserted a blank row and typed that heading. Now, this time I'm not going to load the data into a new file. So last time what I did is I started a new Excel file and I did data, get data, and I chose where the data was coming from, and this was all in a new Excel file, but this time I actually want to do the data manipulation in the same file. So I will click Browse, and I will choose the same file. And my mouse pointer has disappeared again.
They can still see it.
Well, I can't see it. I don't know what's happening with it, but
it's PowerPoint for you.
No, it's Excel. Right. So what I've done is I've chosen the same file. So in a way, it's like creating a loop. It's saying that I want to work on the data in this file. In Power Query on Windows, you'd say get data from a range within the current file, but it's slightly different here. You don't have that option yet. So at the moment, you have to use Browse and browse to the same file and then click Next. Choose the sheet and click on. Now this time I'm not going to click Load, because if I click Load, it loads the data into the spreadsheet. If you click Next at this point, it opens the query editor, and I know I want the query editor to open because I know I've got some manipulation to do. So what we've got here is we've got the 3 steps that it's created. So this time it's created 3 steps, not 4. So there's obviously one step that it's not had to do. It's not had to promote the headers, because well, that's interesting. I would have said it should have treated row 1 as the header, but it hasn't. So I'm going to have to do that myself. It's created a header called column 1, but it's not added the step to promote the headers. So I will add that as a step. In fact, I can do that straight away. I can go to Transform, Use First Row as Headers. So now whatever was on row 1 becomes the heading, and it's added the promoted headers step in there for me. So once I've done that, I then want to split this data up. So right click, Split Column by Delimiter. The delimiter is the semicolon. Okay, if you look closely, you can see there's a semicolon there between each element, not between the name and the email address, but if you take the name and email address as one element and the next name and email address as the next, there's a semicolon as the separator. So choose semicolon, but I want to split it up by row, not by column. So if you click on Advanced, you get an option to split by rows, and then click on OK. So what it's now done is it's taken all the data that was in one column and it's split it up by row or into rows. I guess it's like a transpose. Then just to finish this off, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to do a find and replace to remove the greater than sign at the end. So right click, replace values, find the greater than sign, replace with nothing. Then I'm going to split the name from the email address by splitting it at space less than. So like I did before, split column by delimiter, custom, space less than, and click OK. And then select just the meeting invite column and right click, remove column. And we are left with a bunch of email addresses. We do have a blank row at the bottom. For some reason, it always seems to bring in an extra item at the end. So Peter's saying, could have done with this a few years ago. Yes, a lot. It is. It's amazing. It's great that they've added it to the Mac, and okay, it's not perfect and it's not as fully featured as Windows, but I think they'll get there. At the moment it's just in beta. But the last thing I want to do is I want to remove that last row. Now you can't just right click delete like you do in Excel itself. You don't even have to be on the last row. What we do here is we go to home and we go to remove rows and remove bottom rows and just put one in there because I want to remove just the bottom row. Click on OK. And there we go. Okay, so let's move on. That was cleaning data, and the query editor can do more than just clean data. You can also use it to create calculated columns. So let's go and have a look at that. Calculated columns. I'm going to go back to the other file that I was using, which was Power Query 1. So that one there. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to add an extra column which calculates the monthly salary. Now, one way to do it is progress not perfection. I've heard that before. Yes, I know where I heard that. That's a good saying. So I could just do a normal formula. So G2 divided by 12, and it automatically copies it down because it's a table. But the problem we've got is that we've now got 900 odd formulas in this column. Now you might be thinking, so what? But formulas take up more space in the memory and require more processing powers than straight numbers do. I'm not saying avoid formulas because, we've grown up with formulas. Excel spreadsheets are all about formulas. But what I'm saying is if there's an alternative to having 900 formulas, then consider it. Particularly if those formulas are complex formulas like lookups and multiple ifs and things like that. So what I'm saying is, most people would probably do it this way, but it's probably not the most efficient. So let's go and get rid of that column and instead go to the query editor. So data, launch query editor. Make sure I'm on the right query, which I am. Make sure I'm on the last step, which I am. And then there's two ways that I can do this. I can go to add column because I want to create a column. And I can go to custom column, add column, custom column, give the column a name. So I'll call that monthly salary. And in the box there, it's already got an equal sign in. I basically want to say annual salary divided by 12. So double click on annual salary from that list and it puts it in, divided by 12. Click on OK. And it creates an extra step, and that step has created that formula. And we have that extra column. Now, if I then decide I'd like to change the formula, I just click on the cogwheel. Obviously, I wouldn't change it here because there's always going to be 12 months, but that's where you could change it. Or you could edit it up here. So what that is saying is that it's saying add a column to the table, add it after the step called changed column type 1. The column's going to be called monthly salary, and for each row the formula is annual salary divided by 12. But you know, who needs to know the M code when you can do it through a nice friendly dialog box? So if I was now to come out of the query editor and look at the entries we've got in column M, if you look up in the formula bar, you can see that we've got numbers, not formulas, and that is going to be much more efficient. Okay, let's go back to the query editor and delete that step, because I want to show you another way to do the same thing basically, which is to create the monthly salary column. So this time I'm going to click on annual salary and I'm going to go to add column, but instead of custom column I'm going to go to standard divide. Okay, standard divide. Type 12 in there and click on OK. And it's done exactly the same thing. The only difference is that instead of having the step called custom column, it's created a step called inserted division, and then I would have to go in and change the heading. So it's it's up to you. What you've got here is you've got standard mathematical operations. So if you wanted to add the data from one column to another column, or you wanted to add, say, 1,000 to everybody's salary to give their new salary, then you could do that. So let's do that. Let's create a new column. So add column. So there's two ways I could do this. I could do add column, custom column, create a column called new salary, and the formula will be annual salary plus 1,000. So that's one way to do it. So it's added 1,000 onto everybody's salary. The other way to do it would be to say add column standard add and type in 1,000. Either way works. Obviously with this way you'd have to double click to change the heading. Okay, Peter wants to come and work for me. Obviously that's a £1,000 salary increase. Okay, so that's one type of formula we can do. Let me show you another type of formula. So this time I want to create a custom column which is going to be called name, which is going to combine the first character of the first name with a space with the surname. Now there's a couple of ways you could do this. One way to do it would be to create a new column, select the first name, create a new column and extract the first character. And that would just create a new column that's got the first character of the first name. And then you can combine that with the surname. Okay, doesn't matter that that's way over there. So what I did there, I'll just redo that. I selected the first name column and I clicked on add column because I want to create a new column, extract first characters, and selected, oops, do that again. Extract first characters, select 1. And I have this new column called first character. I should probably rename it to initial. And then I want to join initial to surname. Now, this is important. I need to make sure I select initial and then hold the control key down and select surname. If I selected surname and then held the control key down and selected initial, then the new column I'm about to create would be the surname and then an initial. So when you're merging columns together, it's actually important the order that you select them. So select the initial column and then hold the control key down and click on surname. It seems to be that when I hold the control key down and click on a heading, not only does it select it, it also brought the right click menu up. So I'm guessing that could be a bug, or it could just be the way I've got my keyboard configured. I will check that. Let's just try that again. Select initial, and then yeah, it is. If I hold the control key down, it's still bringing up, it's selecting it, but it's bringing up that right click menu. Okay, so once I've got those selected in the right order, click on add column, merge columns. The separator I'm going to have as a full stop and a space, and the new column is going to be called name. So I now have a new column which is showing the initial and a full stop and a space and the surname. So as I said, make sure you select those columns in the right order and then use add column and merge columns, specify your separator, and you're away. Now at this stage I can delete that initial column. I don't need it. It doesn't mess that up because the removing of that column is performed after you've done the merge. So it's quite safe to remove any columns like the initial column because we don't need it anymore. Okay. We can also do if statements as well. So let me show you an if statement. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another column to calculate the tax. And the tax is going to be based on the annual salary. So if the annual salary is greater than 40,000, then the tax will be 20% of the salary. Otherwise, it'll be 10% of the salary. So add column, custom column, call it tax, and then I'm going to use an if function. Now an if function in M is written a little bit different to an if function in Excel. So if you're familiar with equals if in Excel, this is a little bit different. For a start, it's case sensitive. Secondly, it doesn't use brackets. And thirdly, it doesn't use commas. We'd say if the annual salary is greater than 40,000, then the annual salary will be multiplied by 20%, else the annual salary will be multiplied by 10%. So you have to use decimals. You can't use 10% with the percent sign because the percent sign means something in M, and you don't write it like you would do in Excel. You say if then else. So it is more like a real programming language. Okay, so if then else, and they have to be in lowercase. If I happen to have a capital T of then if I click OK, we get an error. Okay, it's actually highlighted where the problem is. So let's just change that to a lowercase t and we're away. So we've got our tax column, which is either 10% or 20% of the salary, dependent on the actual salary. All right, so that is an introduction to calculated columns. There's a lot more that you can do with calculated columns, but that is an introduction to it. Now, unpivot. Unpivot is one of my favourites. It's like a hidden gem of Power Query. It's actually easier to show you what it can do than try and explain it. So let me show you what it can do. Okay, so I'm going to open up a different file here. Don't need to keep those changes. I'll close that one down as well and open up the file called unpivot. Okay, so this here looks like a pivot table. It's not a pivot table. It looks like a pivot table in terms of the fact it's got headings there, and it's got headings there, and it's got totals, and it's got numbers. So this could have been created many, many years ago, before pivot tables were invented, or it could have been created by somebody who didn't realize that you could take a table of data, a list of data, and convert it into something that looks like this in about 6 clicks. Somebody's gone through and done all of this manually with a whole bunch of formulas and everything. But the problem I've got is that I need the data to be in a list. I need it to be area, week, number. I need a 3-column list. I don't need it in a table. Or it could be that this data was downloaded from a web page or another Excel file, and it's in the wrong format. But basically, if you think about how a pivot table works, you have a list and you convert it into something that looks like that. Unpivot goes the other way, where you have data that looks like a pivot table and you basically reverse engineer it back into a list. So this is how we do it. This time I'm going to unpivot the data in the same file. So last time I showed you that you can go to data, get data, and then choose the same file. There's another way you can do that. You can go directly into the query editor, and from the query editor there is on the home tab a get data button. So we'll do get data, Excel workbook, and then browse to the same file. And this time my mouse pointer didn't disappear. That's good. Okay, so click next and select the worksheet and click create. Okay, so what that create does is it basically creates the query. So I went into the query editor, I had a blank query, and I brought the data in from the same file, and the create button creates the query. The first thing I need to do is I need to delete those blank rows. Now, theoretically, I could say home, remove rows, bottom rows, to remove bottom rows 4, but we don't know that it's always going to be 4 blank rows. You know, next week it could be 5 blank rows. Having said that, sometimes you use Power Query just to do a one-off tidy up. It's not something that's going to be repeated week after week after week. So it could just be you've got some data, it's in a bad format and you need to tidy it up. Power Query is the easiest way to do that. As I said, even if you're never going to use the refresh. That's what I recommend people use if they've got those meeting invite names in a single cell because they've been exported out of Outlook. So sometimes, as I say, you just want to do it as a single, just a single operation, just as a one-off. But imagine that this was a repeating operation. What I'm going to do instead is say remove rows, remove blank rows. That's not part of unpivot. That was just by the way, because I had extra rows. To do the on pivot, we click on the first column heading with the numbers in and click on the last column heading with the numbers in. Having said that, I don't want to include the totals. So before I even do that, I'm going to remove the totals column by selecting it, right clicking, remove columns. And I want to remove the totals row. The totals row, having got rid of the blank rows, will always be the bottom row. So here I can say home, remove rows, remove bottom rows, and one row. And then I'm ready to do my unpivot. So I will click on the first column with numbers in, hold the shift key down and click on the last column. So holding the shift key down allows me to select all the columns in between. So click the first one, shift and click the last one, and then click transform, unpivot columns. And magically our table is converted back into a list. If I want to rename these columns, I can do so. Keep that as area, change that to be week, and change that to be, say, sales revenue. And then close down the query editor. It will stick a new sheet in, but that is what unpivot can do. And I have used it, my clients have used it many times, just to basically take data that is stored in that format into that format, which I think, as I say, is rather cool. Okie dokie, right, so that is an example of unpivot. Let's move on to append queries. What is an append query? Well, let me show you that. I need to close this file down, won't save it, and open up the file called append1. Okay, so what I have here is I have 3 worksheets in the same file. So this sheet has got all the sales from San Francisco, and this sheet has got all the sales from New York City, and this sheet has got all the sales from Philadelphia. And each sheet has also got a table in it. So that table there is called San Francisco without space. That table is NYC, and that table is Philadelphia. So the table names and the sheet names are slightly different. Now, I want to create some pivot tables from the 3 tables. Traditionally, what I would need to do is I would need to take this data, copy it and paste it to there, and then take this data and copy it and paste it to below that. Because to build a pivot table, you need to have the data in one table. So there'd be a lot of copying and pasting, copying that to there, copying that, and so on and so on. Imagine if you had 20 sheets and you were doing this every week or every month. It would take you forever to do. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to use is an append query. Go into the query editor and select Get Data from Excel Workbook and choose Append1. Oops, my mouse pointer's disappeared again. There it is. Okay, Append1 and Get Data. And next. And then what I need to do is I need to just bring in the data that I'm interested in. In fact, let's cancel this. It's probably easier to do this in a new file. So let's close that file down, start a brand new file and do it in there instead. So data, get data, get data, Excel workbook and go and find the Excel file, which was append 1. There we go. And I'm going to select the 3 tabs, the 3 tables, so the NYC table, the Philadelphia table, and the San Francisco table. You'll notice it's called Philadelphia 1 because the sheet is called Philadelphia. So it's just tagged a 1 onto the end. So you can't have a sheet name and a table name the same in the query. You can in the spreadsheet, but not in the query. And then click on Next, and that will take us into the query editor. So I have 3 queries. Why 3 queries? Because there are 3 sources of data. You might not think there's 3 sources of data because there's only 1 file, but it was 3 separate tables. So there are 3 queries, 1 query for each table. And then what I do is I go to Home, Combine, Append Queries. Now, I like to do append queries as new, and that will create a new query, because if you just click append queries, it will combine the data from, in this case, New York City and Philadelphia with the San Francisco data. So it will take that data and add it into that data, and take that data and add it into that data. And that's not what I want to do. I want to keep those 3 data sets as separate. So I always do combine append queries as new. In this case, we've got 3 or more tables. It's already picked up San Francisco because that's the one I've highlighted. So I need to add New York City and Philadelphia 1 and click on OK. And that pretty much is it. That has now created a 4th table, a 4th query called append, which I can right click rename if I want to, and call it all data or something similar. But that has combined the data from those 3 tables together. So when I come out of the query editor, I have a new table, and I can easily create a pivot table from that data. So that is an append query. As I say, append queries are used to combine data together. All right, the last topic to cover is merge queries. And to me, a merge query is the equivalent of a lookup. So if you think of an append query is where you are combining rows together from separate tables or separate sheets or separate files, whereas a merge query is combining columns together. Merge is columns, append is rows. But let's go and have a look at merge queries. So I'll close this file down, and I'll use the file called merge1. So what I have here in this file, let's make this a wee bit bigger. What I have in this file is 2 separate tables. They could have been on separate sheets. I just chose to put them on the same sheet. They are linked together. They're linked together in terms of we've got a grade column in here, and we've got a band column in here. And so we can say that, for example, Dorothy is earning 30,000. How do we know that? Because she's on grade A, and anyone on grade A is earning 30,000. Barbara is earning 38,000 because Barbara's on grade D, and anyone on grade D is earning 38,000. So that's how in our minds we can link those 2 tables together. But what I need to do is I need to combine them together via a query so that I can have an extra column in here, because I want to see the salaries in there. Now, one option would be to do a whole bunch of lookups. I could do an X lookup in there to look up the grade in here and grab the salary and put it in there. But then you're dealing with a bunch of extra formulas which you don't really need. As I said to you before, if you can have a way of not having all those formulas, because okay, there's only 20 rows of data, what if there's 20,000? You're then going to come up with performance issues. So doing it through the query editor is a better way of doing it. Okay, so this is what we do. First of all, I'm going to go to data and get data. Choose the Excel file. I'm going to use the same Excel file, which is merge1. And I'm going to go straight into, before I go straight into the query editor, I need to select the two tables and then go into the query editor. Okay, so this is what I do. On the Home tab, I go to Combine, Merge Queries as New. The left table for the merge, I'm going to choose as Employees. And the right table for the merge, I'm going to choose as Salaries. So those are my two tables. As I said, they're in the same sheet. They don't have to be in the same sheet. But then I have to tell Excel how those two tables are connected. So I click on Grade here, and I click on Band there, and click on OK. And what that has done is that has created a new query, which is called Merge, which I can rename if I want to. I would tend to call it All Data. But I don't see the salaries. I don't see the actual salary. What I see is a column called TBL Salaries, which is the name of the column that's got the salaries in. Or the name of the table, sorry, that's got the salaries in. So how do I actually get to the salaries? I click on the double-headed arrow there, and I take the tick out of everything except salary. I don't need the band because I've already got the grade there, and so I just select salary and click on OK. And I now have the salaries shown as a separate column. I can then come out of the query editor, and we've now got an extra column, an extra table. There we go, extra table, and all we have is the numeric values. So if I want to create a pivot table, for example, to show total salaries per office, I can do that. I can just click on Insert Pivot Table, tell it where to put the pivot table, drag in office into rows, drag in salary into values, and I've got the total salary broken down by office. Whereas if I had the data stored in its original format, I wouldn't be able to do that because the data is in two separate tables. Okie dokie, right, so that brings us to the end of the session. I hope you found it useful. If you have, please hit the like button. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions. If you need to drop off, thank you very much for joining. I will be running more live sessions. I'm not sure what topics I'll cover, but if you want to suggest any, stick them in the chat, or once the live feed is finished, stick them in the comments. Not sure whether it'll be Windows or Mac. And I would say the best way to keep up to date with what I'm doing is to subscribe to the channel. So click that subscribe button. Also, sign up to my newsletter, which you can do via the Excel Trainer website. Okay, so do we have any questions that I haven't answered? Doesn't look like it. I'm just going back through the chat. I think the questions that were asked have been answered. But if anybody wants to put any questions in, I'm more than happy to take questions, as I say. What was your favourite bit? Let me know what your favourite bit of Power Query was.
That it's on the Mac.
That it's on the Mac, yes. I would say that it's on the Mac, yes, for many people. You're very welcome, Renee. You're very welcome, Peter. For me, I would say, I honestly don't know. I would probably say unpivot is very, very useful, but the whole thing is useful. If you already use Power Query, if you've used it on Windows, how do you think it stacks up on the Mac? I think it's getting there. Remember that it is, it's just a beta at the moment. I'm sure there will be changes before it goes into general availability. So I don't see any questions. No questions. No questions. Okie dokie. Right. Well, if there are no more questions, let's wrap up there. So thanks once again. And as I say at the end of my videos, have an excellent day. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.